Hello everybody, this is Nathan Nelson with Stillwater Outdoors, and in this video today we're going to be talking about the lessons that I have learned following the tracks of big bucks in the snow in northern Wisconsin. Now, one of the first things that I've learned about buck tracking is that your habitat is going to dictate your style of hunting. In other words, if you're in an area where there's heavily managed woods, there's a lot of timber harvest, there's a lot of clear cuts, select cuts. What happens in these areas is that when the sunlight hits the forest floor because of a timber cut, all of a sudden there's this explosion of growth and the woods gets very thick. This is great food for deer, great cover. You'll find that there's a lot of tracks in these areas, a lot better deer densities. But the problem that you'll face in a habitat like that is that you are going to have to be plowing through a lot of brush, so you're going to make a lot more noise. So that means you're going to have to be moving a lot slower to be able to make it happen. The other thing is that you're not going to be able to see as far, so you're going to have to make sure that you get really close to a deer in order to pull off a shot. And then the other issue that you're going to run into is that oftentimes, because there's better deer populations, you're going to spend a lot of time sorting out the tracks in that area. There's just going to be this barnyard effect where there's deer all over the place, leaving tracks all over, and so you're going to have to spend a lot of extra time sorting out where your buck is actually headed. Now, on the opposite side of that, you'll get some areas where there is not as much managed forest. It's a lot of high canopy, not much understory, old growth forest. So when you're in a situation like that, tracking can be very nice because you can move so easily through the woods and you can cover a lot of ground and not make much noise to do it. The one disadvantage, though, that you're going to have with an area like that is oftentimes the bucks will be able to see you before you see them. They're going to see you and spot you from a long ways away, and they'll pick out that movement and that motion. So it all comes with its advantages and disadvantages. It's going to be up to your preference and your style. I know that I've had a lot of good success in both habitats. In fact, I was just tracking a buck with my bow the other day in a very thick, dense wooded area, and I snuck up to 7 yards from him. And so I had to be very, very slow and stealthy to get to him, and I knew I was in his bedroom. But it can be done in that thick habitat. If I would have had a gun, I would have killed him. The second thing that I've learned is that there's a big difference between buck tracking and still hunting. Oftentimes you'll hear a lot of people talk about buck tracking and still hunting interchangeably like they're the same thing, but they aren't. When you're following a track, oftentimes you're going to follow the speed at which that deer is moving. So if he's cruising, you're cruising. You're not still hunting. You follow him. Now, if you start to see that he's browsing, that he's taking his time and he's eating a little bit here and he's moving a little bit there, that's when you start to follow his pace. You start to slow down. Okay, that's when you start to get into more of that stalking kind of mode. Another lesson that I've learned is that oftentimes when you track a buck, and if you bump him out of his bed, you're going to get to see where he takes you on his escape routes. You're going to get to see where he likes to retreat when he's being hunted. So you'll find that there's some pretty good spots that these bucks like to go to. And last year, I had a buck that bedded on a ridge the first time that I bumped him out of it, and then a couple days later I went back and he bedded in the exact same bed in the snow. The fourth thing that I've learned is that when a buck is retreating from a predator, like us hunters as buck trackers, they are going to often run with the wind to their back. And man, do I just hate when they do that. It's so hard to get close to a buck when he can smell you the whole time. And the only way that I've found to get around that is to try to swing around. But, honestly, I don't really like swinging around, because you don't really know where he's going, and you spend so much time trying to figure out where he's at because you're not following a track. It really makes it very difficult. So if you find a track for a buck that doesn't put the wind to his back, oh boy, you are in the money. The fifth thing that I've learned from buck tracking is that As these deer take me through their life, they show me where they bed. And oftentimes where they are bedding is on the leeward sides of ridges. These locations give them every advantage. They can smell what's coming behind them and they can see everything out in front of them. It's a perfect setup for a buck. The sixth thing that I've learned is that bucks like to bed in areas that have blowdowns. In other words, if a windstorm comes through and it knocks down a bunch of trees, I often find that there is plenty of beds in and around those areas. The seventh thing that I've learned is that one of the hardest parts in this whole process is finding a good track. The best solution that I have found to this is to make sure you get up plenty early, especially if you don't have many opportunities to track a buck. You don't want to waste a lot of time. You got to get up, you got to get out there, you got to find a track. And once you find the track, then you're in the game. But man, it's not easy to find a good track sometimes. It may require that you get into the woods a little bit more than just exploring from the road. So you got to have some spots picked out and some areas to key in on that you know there's some good deer at. The eighth thing that I have learned about buck tracking is the importance of understanding what a good buck track is in your area. You guys, I spent so much time those first couple years looking for the main size track where they're talking about these 3-inch wide, 3 to 3¼ inch wide tracks like moose hooves. We don't have that where I live. I just tracked a buck in the snow that's probably 135-inch 4-year-old, and he had a 2¼ inch wide to 2 3/8 inch wide track. We don't have 3-inch tracks up here. I measured the track off of a 150-inch buck one time up here that was an old deer, not even 2½ inches wide. So you got to know what a good track is in your area. Otherwise, you're going to skip right over ones that are slammers because you think that there's something bigger out there. The next thing that I've learned while buck tracking is what food sources the deer actually prefer. And this is really a unique thing because I've had some epiphany moments this last season about red oaks. I had no idea that the deer loved acorns, red oak acorns, this much. I'd always heard about the white oak acorns and oh yeah, they're just so great. But we don't have white oak acorns up where I'm at least not the high quality ones. We got some bur oaks, but those aren't going to be as much of a draw as what you would get from a regular white oak. So when I was following all these tracks and I'm seeing these areas that are just tore to pieces in the snow where they're trying to get at these red oak acorns, man, that tells me when I'm tracking, I need to key in on areas where there's some good mature oaks that are dropping acorns. The other thing that's interesting is that once you find out what types of food sources the deer like, you can then use satellite imagery to find those things anywhere in your county. I use base map all the time to look up different areas where there are red oaks. There's a different unique color that they have on their leaves that show up very easily in the satellite imagery. You got to obviously have a good quality satellite imagery to see that, but man, does that take a lot of the legwork out of it for you when you can just look at an image and be like, oh yeah, there's the oaks there, and oh yeah, there's the oaks there. Works out great, guys. Very nice. The final lesson that I want to share with you guys that I've learned is that when you start to see beds in the snow from the buck that you're tracking, get ready. He might be bedded really close. I've seen this on numerous occasions where when that deer beds that first time, he'll get up a couple hours later, shift his bed another 10, 15, 20, 30 yards to a different spot, and then maybe even do it again at another spot. He's getting up, he's stretching, he's moving around, he's nibbling on a little bit of food. So when you see a bed, get ready, because he is right there. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Please be sure to like and subscribe to my channel.